I want to talk to you about preservation. It's very important to me as an idea, historic preservation, managing our built environment with some level of sensitivity and thoughtfulness. And I think it's something that really gets to the heart of the character of the Fifth Ward. We have an extraordinary housing stock. We have incredible built environment. Our parks are beautiful. There are monuments. There is all sorts of um, created geography. And how we manage that built environment, I think, helps to define who we are. So the first thing I want to say is that on a citywide level, we have what I would say is a less than ideal policy when it comes to preservation. Yes, we have a preservation commission that's terrific. There's some funding. There's the Adopt a Landmark program, which now goes into neighborhoods. All of that's terrific. But we are an ad hoc city when it comes to preservation. We wait until a crisis, and then often we don't have the resources to contend with it. We just had a beautiful church a few months ago in the 20th Ward catch on fire, burn badly, but not to the point that it couldn't have been restored, but it was torn down within days based on a concern about whether or not it was a safe environment to be in. Part of that had to do with the condition that the building was in beforehand. And when beautiful historic buildings are in poor condition and we don't really know about it until there's a crisis, that's a failure on the part of the city as a whole. I'm not saying that the city needs to, be responsible for every building in it in terms of maintaining them. Obviously, that's how that really functions. Is that you have private people taking care of their own property, and that's how cities work. We should be making sure we're as aware as possible of the housing stock we do have, and we should also be prepared when we see potential challenges down the line and have some way of addressing those. So I think that it would be terrific if we had some citywide advocacy and we had some legislation that addressed sort of what I'm describing. But I also think we can get to work right away in the Fifth Ward almost as soon as we would step into office. So first, I think what we need is a thoroughgoing assessment of the built environment we have. Uh, Citywide, that would be a big project, but every alderman could really focus on their own ward, and you could do tremendous things. And it's a great opportunity to create some employment locally and kind of raise awareness and sensitivity around preservation. So what you have to do is essentially train a group of people in how to do basic research, how to identify building materials, and a few other things of that nature that would give you in any given building. You can look at it, you can look up the pin, you can assess what kind of materials are being used, and we could have a basic review of all of the built environment, and then maybe we do something a little more in depth if based on that review we are identifying properties that potentially are historic in nature, endangered in nature, a combination of those things, or something else. I think that this is the way forward, is for us to all have an understanding, not of just the kind of biggest, most visible properties, but of all of the properties, and not just the house, the church, the school, but the parks, the statues, the other elements of our environment. We've seen so many trees cut down in the Fifth Ward. And to me, trees have as much of a value in terms of preservation as brick and mortar, if not more. When you get into an old growth tree that's 100 years old, 150 years old, that is irreplaceable. Unfortunately, there's a pattern. The city sort of cynically says, well, we measure the circumference and we plant that many, we plant whatever number of smaller circumference trees add up to that, which is makes about as much sense to me as trying to take apart, a living creature and then put it back together. You can't. That's not how the world works, and certainly we know in terms of science that's not how oxygen production works or absorbing CO2 works. So it's kind of it speaks to a level of ignorance, and I think that is in parallel to the level of ignorance we have about our built environment. That it's not just the trees. We don't really understand what's going on with our buildings. And some of it we could know if we were just looking, and if somebody with the right background and understanding we're looking. In addition to understanding what we have to know that there's a way to do something about the whatever we find that's a potential challenge that we need to address. So I think this is another place where it's the alderman's job to work to develop a fund that can help to address issues of this nature. Um, More broadly, I think that there are definitely transaction fees that would be appropriate for supplying a fund of this sort on a citywide basis. But locally, I think you can do some fundraising around, a specific strategy that really could attract some philanthropies and some private donors who want to see a more robust kind of representation of the built environment of historic properties. And there's no reason, if you're going to do an assessment like that, there's no reason, first, it's not digitized and made available to the public. And secondly, that you don't produce reports. So you can really have a kind of thoroughgoing report, but then you can also do kind of a state of the built environment report on an annual basis that identifies challenges, updates people on particular properties of interest, and we could even have some kind of a conversation around that. So we're always just being aware of what's happening in terms of our environment and in terms of potential preservation opportunities or challenges. My interest in preservation, my excitement about preservation comes from a lot of different things, including the historian Timuel Black talking to me about really the centrality of the built environment for telling the history of marginalized communities. And the way I'm paraphrasing, but the way I understood him to be explaining it to me was, you know, the people who are in power write history books. So you don't have to worry if you're a white person, if you are of the sort of mainstream, affluent mainstream, you don't have to worry about telling your story. But if you're a marginalized group, if you're a group who's been a victim of prejudice and hasn't been given the opportunity to be one of those writers of history, the built environment is where your history is. That's where the stories are kept. Although oral history is an important part of it too, there's a kind of permanence to what has been built that allows us to tell stories in an enduring way. That to me is a deeply motivating notion. I have done work. I did something called the Hyde Park Modern Townhomes Project with Jack Spicer and the Hyde Park Historical Society, where we talked with folks who had bought in the modern townhomes at the very beginning, where they were first built during and just after urban renewal. That was a tremendous project. It's in the Regenstein Library. I was the co-leader of a group called the Coalition to Save the Shrine, which later became Save the Shrine NFP, which saved a church originally founded as St. Clara's Church, called the Shrine of Christ the King when it burned. The Archdiocese tried to tear it down, and we were able to raise a bunch of money, save it, and oversee the first phase of preservation. And, those experiences taught me that both the stories and some of the artifacts that came out of the Modern Townhome Project and the fundraising and the media awareness and the work around the Save the Shrine project taught me that there's a lot that's possible, but that there's less that's possible when you're operating in crisis sometimes. And I believe that we have an opportunity based on a deep culture in our communities of telling our local stories to do something that hasn't really been done in the city yet. And in doing it for ourselves, we could potentially be showing the way for the rest of the wards across the city.